What's up? This is David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital, and you're listening to The Long Game. In this episode, we chat with Palash Soni. Palash is the co-founder and CEO of Goldcast, a digital events platform that helps marketers in B2B SaaS host amazing brand experiences and drive revenue. Before founding Goldcast, Palash began his career as an engineer and moved into business and product leadership roles at a mobile AdTech company. He then began pursuing an MBA at Harvard Business School, but soon after met his co-founders and developed the idea for Goldcast, ended up taking a leave of absence and pursued his vision for the company. In this conversation, we talk about Palash's origin story of his entrepreneurial spirit and learnings from his mom's own business efforts. He shares his goals for attending business school and how it eventually led up to the founding of Goldcast. We get to hear some personal stories from the early days of pitching and building the business to how the Goldcast team was able to position Goldcast to stand out against a sea of competitors. He also shares tips for what it means to run a marketing team like a media company and what the best events look like. I learned a ton about event marketing and felt inspired by Palash, and I think you will too. Here's my conversation with Palash Soni. Hey Palash, welcome to The Long Game.
Thank you, David. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. I think Goldcast and event marketing are very timely topics right now, especially with the pandemic that happened and now like going into potential, people are saying recession and what that means for events and all of that. But just real quick intro, you're co-founder and CEO of Goldcast, a digital events platform. Before we get into that, I've heard on other interviews that your first business venture was with video games. So tell us about that. What was the business?
Yeah, absolutely, David. So this is back when I was probably 9 years old, right? 9 and 10, and as you can see from my accent, I'm not born and brought up in the US. I was, born and brought up in India, and especially in India, I was in a place where, very small place, like a tier 3 town in India, and not a lot going on. So,
which area or which state?
Yeah, it's this state called Madhya Pradesh. So
okay.
That really literally means like central state in Hindi.
Okay. Yeah.
And not a region where, which is economically flourishing. So I used to live in a region where, there were a lot of kids around, and I think I got the instinct to be business-like from my mom and, her side of family, because my mom had always tried with different business ventures and could not, get anything off ground because of the economic situation in the region, but she was very enterprising. And so when I was 9, I got my hands on a secondhand video game console, and this was like 99 or something, right? Which is
which console was it?
It's this gaming console, which it's a Japanese company called Samurai, and
okay.
Yeah, it's something that was very popular in India. I don't know if it was popular outside, but those were cartridges, right? Which you put, and it was very hard to get hold of cartridges at that time. But I got a secondhand gaming console, and I realized like people were fascinated by it, right? And this was in a region where there were not many people had cable television. We didn't have it at that time. So I started a business kind of giving people like 15 minutes to play for 1 rupee, which is, I think, a 60th of a dollar or something. So cheap, but it was nice. I ran it for like 3 months, and then my mom was upset that there are a lot of people coming into our living room. And so,
you're getting too many customers.
Yeah, too many kids.
Yeah, I can imagine a world where you're like, let me just go buy some more video game consoles and have like 10 consoles and scale this up.
I know, but yeah, so it was fun.
That's amazing. And you mentioned that you got the entrepreneurial spirit from your mom. She tried to do a couple business ventures. Do you remember what those were?
Absolutely, yeah. So this was also again when we were still, when I was still young, and she tried to do a bunch of things, right? For example, and it will sound very not normal, but in India it's kind of normal, especially in very smaller cities, for people to have cows, right? That they have, so one or two cows, not like a farm, but so we had a couple of cows, that were donated to us by someone, and then my mom took care of them. And then her first business venture was, okay, let me sell like pure milk, which was very hard to get in the area. And so she would mark it up and start selling it. And then, it didn't really take off because we realized that people care about a few pennies more than actually purity of milk. And so that was one. Then she started a similar business, which was like making snacks, which were also, India has a lot of fried snacks, right? So fried snacks, which were fried in good oil, good quality oil. So that was another one. Again, I think one lesson that I drew from all of that is that market is important. Your value prop is secondary. The market being there is like super important. So they didn't take off, but I saw her really put in the effort while having the duties of bringing up two kids, managing the household, and everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can relate to that. My parents have also attempted have made a couple of attempts at business ownership, and those also didn't work out. And so for me, it's like, okay, I get to learn from their mistakes, and now I get to be like successful in that way. And I talk to them about it every now and then. I don't know if you asked your mom, but I asked him about it. My dad's like, oh, don't talk to me about that. That was a failure, blah, blah, blah. And like, actually, I learned a lot from it. So it's actually a good thing you went through that, which sucks for you, but now I can carry the torch.
No, absolutely, absolutely. It does. And failure is not. I think the best thing about being in the modern sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem is that failure is actually a neutral to a good thing, right? In here, which is non-obvious in people outside of this nice bubble we are in. So
Yeah. And so let's go through a couple of the milestones. You grew up in central India, and I know one of the big things about your path is you ended up going to Harvard Business School before you founded Goldcast. So I'd love to hear maybe from you how you tie together all the different milestones in your life that led you to building Goldcast.
yeah, absolutely, David. I'll keep it short, and you can make me go deep in any one aspect. But I was trained as an engineer, right? So I did electrical and computer science. So I was, broad, but I went into actually what I would say a techno managerial job, right? Where I used to run a small factory for what I would say was like the PNG of India, right? Used to run a small factory manufacturing soaps. So it was a pretty technically intense job and also managing a lot of people. And what I realized in that job was that my impact, even though I was working pretty hard for a 23-year-old, was on the company's trajectory was not that high, right? Like the main impact was being driven by marketing folks, right? They were coming up with concepts and stories on how to actually market those, right? And it was a new thing for me, right? As an engineer who has always only talked to engineers in life. So my next stint after spending 3 years there was in this ad tech company, right? And it was a big company in India and based out of India, US, China. Those are the three main offices, and one of the SoftBank's earliest investments in Asia. But before between those two, the business bug started hitting me again. So I had like a 3-month gap between the two opportunities, and so I tried my hands on another startup, which actually went on for almost like 9 to 10 months, and I had two full-time co-founders as well, and that was a small business CRM. Right, our idea was to
Yes.
build something that can help small businesses maintain loyalties with customers and things like that. And I didn't know anything about starting up at that point, right? Like a tech startup. So I didn't know what an MVP was. And I did all the classic naive mistakes that one should not make if they have read even one article from Paul Graham, right? So we made a lot of mistakes. And ultimately, again, the learning was the same, right? The time was not right. And we overestimated how easy would it be for people to use WhatsApp, for example, right? WhatsApp was taking on
Yeah.
at that point, and it was pretty closed, right? And it had just started taking off, so we were probably too early in what we were trying to do. So that didn't work out. But during that phase of 4 years when I was in the ad tech world, I was always looking for ideas, right?
Yeah.
And
That was that in Mobi.
in Mobi, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And the good thing was I got exposure to the big, tech ecosystem in the West. So all of our customers were companies like Uber, Lyft, Spotify, all the big, companies who have mobile apps. So got to learn a lot from there. And one of the things that I was exposed to being in that company was events, right? So we were a classic B2B company, right? And the way we would build our pipeline would be through events. We would do our own events in all the places, right? France, Europe, UK, Las Vegas. We used to throw our own events, and I would be one of the counterparts, right? Always.
Yeah. And for people listening, when you say events, you're saying like in person big
Oh
events,
yeah.
not like virtual. There was no Zoom back then, right?
No, there was no Zoom. I remember us when we talked to customers, it would be on those like big Polycom phones, right? So this
Yeah.
was 2015, 16, and all in-person events, right? And we would always struggle to prove out what happened in those events, right? How they did
Hmm.
impact our company's bottom line, and it was a stressful situation to be in every time. And I also learned about MarTech as well. So it was contrasting for me to see, okay, MarTech is evolving so fast, right? And our own business, AdTech, is completely disrupting, an existing industry that's billboards, newspaper ads and
Yeah.
things like that. And events have kind of been stuck forever. So that's something that was in my head, right? The other thing also that was very clear to me was that if to build a really great business, you need to be close to your customers, right? So not only does the market need to be good and the timing need to be right, but you need to be very close to customers, which I found it hard from India, right? So that's what motivated me to actually come to the US. And for an immigrant to come to the US and have an open space for exploration, a master's degree is the best way, right? So that's
Yeah.
why I applied and got through HPS. And I actually came in with a very, very focused intent of coming to HBS to start up. So I spent the first year in a very non-traditional way. And traditional in MBA is partying, traveling,
Hmm.
right? And networking. And I did all of that, but in very high moderation. I was very deep into the tech ecosystem and exploring, what could be something that I could pick. So yeah, that's how I made my way to HBS.
There are so many directions we can go here. You said one thing that caught my attention before we go to the business school story. You
Yeah,
said like to build like a game. You've said this in other interviews too, but to build a game-changing software business, you have to be in a market in the US. That's who you're primarily selling for.
yes,
But there are also counterfactuals, right? Like look at Zoho. They're huge. They're at $1 billion in revenue, right? So I'm curious, um, why the decision to switch market that you're in versus building in, because the tech scene in India has been growing really quickly, right?
absolutely. Yeah. The tech scene in India definitely has taken off in the last 2, 3 years, right? So when I was making this decision in 2018, there were a few things that guided my experience, right? One is my own first startup experience, right? Where I didn't, even though I was like next to the customers, I didn't talk to them as much. I was like, I had my own ideas on how things should be
Yeah.
done. I was paddling them with customers, and I didn't really listen to customers. So that, and then in my stint at Mobi, I was a product manager for the last 1.5 years, right? And I realized that um, even though there are success stories, right? Like Freshworks was already becoming a
Mhm.
success story by then, and Zoho was another one. I realized I didn't have confidence that I could pull it off, right? It was not
Uh,
that simple. And I tried doing that in as a PM, right? I had a decently big charter by then because I had spent time in the company, and I realized that whatever we came up with was always one step behind competition and market, right? We didn't have that real connect with the customers just because of the friction of time zone and everything else. And not having a core understanding of what your customers day to day and life is like. So um, long answer, it's also a short answer is it's also a personal preference, right?
Yeah.
But it is hard to do that from India even today, although there are a lot more success stories to kind of guide your path.
Yeah, I was just looking up another company called Topline, and they're based in India, and they seem to be doing well. But I'm like, wow, lots of respect for being able to build a product for mostly a market in another country and break in and still be successful. That's tough. Like when you're in the US, it's a little bit easier. So that makes a ton of sense why you made that decision.
Yeah.
And so my understanding here then is the reason you moved, the reason why you chose business school was mainly like, how do I get to the States and then start doing entrepreneurship there? Is that the conduit to that end goal?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other reason, David, was that I didn't have a network in the US, right? Besides, say, 10 customers and 20 colleagues, I didn't know anyone in the US. So um, I thought it's also a great place to meet very smart people and people of very different backgrounds, right? So
Yeah. And so you mentioned you had this clear focus going to business school. And like I've spoken to a lot of people who were applying. I almost applied but decided against it. My girlfriend is currently applying. And what I've realized is a lot of people aren't completely sure what they want in business school, where it's like, let me go explore a little bit more. But you had this clear focus. Tell us more about that focus and what you were hoping to get out of it. And did it meet your expectations?
absolutely, David. So I know a lot of people are very skeptical of the value of MBA. I am actually where I am. That 1 year at Harvard actually has a significant impact on where I am for a variety of reasons. But the reason I think one of the reasons why I had a clear focus is because I was also slightly older than the average candidate. Right, so the average BC candidate is 4 years fresh out of management consulting, right? And I had 7 years of experience in under my belt, right? So that is probably one of those things. And the second thing is I had sort of tasted, maybe not at that level, but things that people would typically do after business school, right? Which is take switch into a tech role, do product and things like that. And so that fascination for me wasn't there, that I want to go and explore a bunch of careers and so yes, I did have a lot more clarity on what to do versus a lot of people come in wanting to make that decision while in business school.
Yeah. The thought process you shared was the exact reason I decided not to go. I was a product manager at HubSpot at the time and was very happy with my salary, moved to a head of growth role, better salary. Like, why would I go back to school now? But I think you have a different context where you want to build up that network, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier when you were in Mobi, you saw how tough it was to demonstrate business impact of the events.
Yeah.
You go to business school, you eventually drop out, I understand, and do Goldcast.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst for you to start Goldcast while you were in school?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And it's there are a lot of things that happen in the in the 4 or 5 months we decided to do and then take a break from school. But we had in like late 2020s, right? We were one of the in my first semester, basically. Mm-hmm. One of the ideas that we were exploring was events because it had characteristics that my past ideas did not have, right? At least one of them, which is the market is huge, right? The events market is huge, and there was some sort of founder market fit in the sense that I understood B2B marketing and sales, right? I understood events. So we started looking at events, and at that time our approach was more like, how do we measure the impact of events, right? And it wasn't clicking at that time because the measurement part in and of itself for in-person events is not that meaty. So it's not a great idea in and of itself. So we said, okay, let's keep it on the back burner, and then we were back in market for ideas. And this around Feb time when COVID was becoming a thing, right? And at that time we didn't know that the world will shut down, right? We just knew that it probably makes sense to have something to do with online events, right? My mind went back to my own past, and I was like, okay, because we were very immersed in China at InMobi, right? We did a lot of events in China, and I was like, okay, how will that happen, and how will InMobi have built pipeline in this time? And so we started looking at virtual events, and this was Feb of 2020, right? So
Great timing.
yes, and this was at that time. It wasn't clear that the world was shut down. Our biggest competitor, Hopin, was in private beta, so you could not actually sign up and use Hopin. And the only alternative was Zoom and a couple of like pre-seed companies, right? So we thought timing looks right, right? This industry has not actually gone through any change in the last 20 years, so maybe there's time for it to go through the kind of change that email marketing or ads have gone through, and it's also a great wedge into this market, right? So we started exploring what digital events could look like. And then COVID became a thing, right? All of a sudden. And our early idea was, okay, we'll do it in the summers, we'll build product slowly, and then we'll launch it in 2021 when we graduate, and we'll probably raise some money. And it became clear that that's not going to happen, because by the time the summer started for our end of first year, there were already a bunch of companies that had raised money, and the market became super competitive, right? And a lot of pushback we got from VCs when we went to talk to them was, A, you are in school, you have no legitimate path to actually start a company full time from an immigration point of view, right? And also there's so much competition, and we don't really know what you're doing. So it was pretty challenging at that time and demotivating, but we were pretty deep into thinking about this problem statement. And I even when all of this was happening, right, and there was a lot of chaos in this industry, what I saw, and this also has some bit to do with my past experience, was that everyone was super wide, right? So everyone was solving the problem of digital events, but digital events or events in general is not a monolithic entity, right? It's every kind of event is different, right? Universities, they're doing events, have a very different motive from a B2B company doing an event versus a trade show. So we knew that B2B events is a different beast, right? Different motivations, the personas are different, their goals are different. So we were focused on that. And our goal was to build a product that could help B2B marketers run events, right? Digital events at that time, and also measure pipeline and orchestrate a go-to-market around it. So it was honestly at that time, I was convinced that this, it's not something that anyone who has a bigger pie in front of them, right, which is the whole world, will actually focus on. So that's what we hammered in. And we found a VC who was like, okay, we'll we'll give you some money, and I will assume that you will figure out immigration. So it was pretty chaotic at that time, but we finally were able to do that and get a visa and start working on this full time.
So I actually don't know much about the challenges with immigration. Is it like you don't have a visa, so you can't incorporate a company? Is that why?
Yeah, no. So David, you can incorporate a company. So the great thing
Okay.
about the US is that anyone who has not even stepped on the US soil can be the owner of a company. You just cannot work without a work visa.
I see.
And as a student, on student visa, you cannot do it. You can only be a student. And then after student visa, any like regular visa that students typically get allows you to only be an employee and not an owner.
Got
So
it.
the visa that we were gunning for was required you to actually, in short, have a term sheet, which would help us prove that we are what in immigration language called extraordinary. So
Yeah.
we needed a VC to bet that we will get this visa, and we needed the term sheet to actually get it. But then there were VCs who were saying, "Okay, get the visa first, and then we'll give you a term sheet." So it was pretty chaotic.
Oh.
They were like, "Okay, if you don't get it, then you are back to school, and then my LPs will curse me for giving money to students who have nothing to lose, right?" And this was also, just to remind you, like 2020, right? This was like middle of 2020, and immigration
Yeah.
was extremely challenging at that point of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And this,
so how did you convince the VC to give you money? Did you have a product in hand to show them, or did you already have like customers who were paying for the product?
no, David, actually, no. We had only a deck, but the deck itself was not good. It was terrible if I look at it today, but it was thought through, and we were and we were three business school, students who were willing to take a break in what was at that point a pretty risky environment, right? It wasn't clear that the economy will go up like a rocket in COVID. So I think Afford Capital, which took a bet on us, they saw that we are taking a significant amount of personal risk by even attempting to do it. And pre-seed investments, as you would know, is all about betting on people. So probably this convinced them that they could take a bet on us. So there were two VCs who came together, gave us some money to get started.
Yeah, it's amazing hearing the story because it's like the perfect storm. Like your experience at InMobi, knowing China, seeing the pandemic coming, like going to HBS, like a lot of these things just perfectly came together for you and your co-founders to start Goldcast.
Yeah. So
and
everything.
I heard on your interview with Dave Gerhardt, just with all of this stuff going on, figuring out Goldcast, that you were also living in first, you were new to the US about a year in. You were living in a 1-bedroom place with your wife, a baby, your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And you said it was also one of the happiest times. So tell us more about that. Like what was going on in that whole period of your life?
Yeah, definitely, David. And this is it was a time of madness, but also a lot of introspection for me. So in summary, I took what you would categorize, or anyone would categorize as pretty reckless risk, right? Because I had a 3-month-old kid when I was going off school, and all my savings were, I had basically no savings because I was saving in Indian rupees, right? Which doesn't mean much in US dollars. So, and I had a loan of almost $80,000 from HBS for 1 year, right? It's very so, so it was reckless, right? And in the first year, we didn't take any salary, right? So I had to figure out how to live with what very little amount that I had from savings and from scholarships from HBS to survive that 1 year. And so HBS allowed us to live in the student apartments, and so I was living in Cambridge actually in a student apartment which was 400 square feet. So it was just 1 bedroom.
Wow.
And my mother-in-law was here, and she was stuck because of COVID. She could not go back. So
it was pretty bad in India during that time, I remember.
It was actually not that bad in India, but the flights from the US stopped. So there was no to and fro flight from the US.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
So 4 of you in a 400 square studio. What was that like?
It was honestly in some way a time that I still remember because it was a formative time, right, for me to figure out myself as a real entrepreneur and what it means to do 0 to 1, and but also I got to spend time with my kid, right, because we were always at home. So I didn't feel like I didn't spend time with him, even though I was clocking like 13 hours a day. And so it was good in many ways, and it taught me that I probably don't need a lot of money to be happy. Because at that time I barely like ate out and didn't even order in that 1 year. We were surviving in some ways. So and I was happy. So I thought, okay, probably that's good, and that gave me the sort of heart to take more risks as we went on, right? Because I thought, what is the worst that will happen? Nothing can be, I cannot be poorer than I am right now, and I'm still happy. So I am good. So yeah, that was one. And like I remember a funny anecdote from our Series A fundraise, right, which was just in March of not Series A, seed in March of 2021, right? And I was pitching to Bain Capital, right, in a partner meeting, and that deal didn't go through, but they had like 12 partners on a Zoom call, and I was starting my intro. And at that very moment, my kid who was just playing by my side, he fell. He had just started walking, and he fell, and he started crying at the top of his lungs. So I had to pause the meeting and go and give him to his mother, and then resume. It was pretty funny and awkward.
I love that whole story of perseverance, working through challenges, and also just realizing, I don't need a lot to be happy. I think more of us could go through those sort of periods and just like learn what we're capable of. Like I remember when I was like going through my own career change, I was living in Los Angeles, and people were saying, "Oh, that must have been so cool living in LA." And I'm like, whatever picture you have of Los Angeles right now, that was not where I was living. I was living I was paying very cheap rent. There were like lots of cockroaches, and I was doing what I had to do. Probably not as at an extreme of a situation as you had, but it's a formative experience that, I think it's worth having some adversity to go through and prove to yourself that you can get through it.
Definitely. Yeah, it was transformative.
Yeah. I have to ask, how was what was your wife's role during all of this? Like, was she just focused on taking care of your child and your mother-in-law, and like, how are they supporting you? Because I imagine that must have been a big thing to consider as well throughout all of this.
Yeah, for sure. So unfortunately, my visa that I had, right, did not allow my wife to work in the US. So she could not work, and so she was taking care of the kid, and that definitely helped. Actually, that's important to note. She was the primary caretaker in many ways. So and my mother-in-law was here, and even though she did not want to be here after 6 months, but she was stuck. So that
Oh,
also helped. Yeah, but they were very supportive, right? Like my wife also quickly realized that, oh, maybe we don't need as much to be happy, and so we were both very in sync with the fact that this is fine, we can live with this for some time.
yeah. Yeah. It's very fortunate that you were both on the same page, because that could easily have gone the other direction, and you're in a much better situation now.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned something interesting going back to Goldcast and focusing on B2B SaaS. I know, like, you're not building for someone teaching yoga classes online, right? So tell me more about how you differentiated amongst all these other competitors who were also jumping in on this trend at the time.
Yeah, absolutely, David. So our core sort of persona was the B2B event marketer, right? Someone who has a very specific goal of driving pipeline through events, right? And any event that's done by a marketing team in a B2B company could not have any other goal. And for them, not just the event itself, but the what happens in and around events with their sales teams, how they generate data, analyze it, and share it with teams, and how all the go-to-market teams come together is equally important as events are. And so it at that point it did sound like a trivial problem, right? But as we dug in, we realized that it is not trivial because you
Mm-hmm.
need to understand the very unique workflows that event marketers have, the needs that they have to coordinate with sales teams and with other marketing teams, and understand all the systems that they were already working in. So the devil was in the details, and so we, in the very early days, we differentiated purely based on our integration. So we had built a couple of integrations with HubSpot and Marketo, and you would know that HubSpot, for example, events, it can take event data, but it's not straightforward, right? In
Yeah.
HubSpot, because it's a tool built for demand gen. So we figured out how to send all of the data in real time to HubSpot, from wherein it could be, say, synced to Salesforce or used for workflows and things like that. And it was what Jason Lemkin says is our 10x feature, right? The HubSpot
Mm-hmm.
integration was our 10x feature, and which is why HubSpot was an investor in our
Yep.
seed round. So that's how we differentiated early on. And as we went in deep into that problem statement, what happened is we built a suite of tools, right, which were what you could, in simple high-level language, categorize as the operating system for event marketers, right? Which was integrations, the data analytics, the workflows that we enabled in the platform, in and around events, where we started getting a significant lead, and people started seeing that this is something that's not easy to replicate, because we have become very core part of their workflows and everything else. So eventually it became very clear that there is a need for a verticalized product in this category, right? Similar to how you would differentiate, say, a regular email marketing tool like Mailchimp versus an
Mm-hmm.
Outreach, which is essentially like Mailchimp for SDRs, right? So that was our bet, that this will be a thing, right, which requires a full purpose-built tool, and that bet played out well.
I love that a lot. There's a lot of lessons learned in positioning and product marketing there, because like if you look at other platforms like Crowdcast, we tried it before. It's not built for B2B software field marketers. And you were very intentional with who do we integrate with? We're going to integrate with HubSpot, not MailChimp, because HubSpot is more upmarket. So I love how intentional you were in making sure you're reaching the right people, not just going after a wide swath of users.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think I just, from my own experience, thought that going wide is like going super wide puts a lot of noise in the system, and the signal that you get from customers um, is something that money and its partners cannot buy. It's just time. You have to put in time, and so we wanted to reduce that and go in there, in a territory which we understand well. So
yeah,
that,
and I'm also hearing what's not being said, but I want to point out is a lot of this was qualitative data. Like you were talking to people, you weren't building out some models and numbers to understand market share and all of that. You were talking to people and understand what they want. And I bring this up because sometimes it feels like some of us get too focused on the numbers and not enough on the people and like those sort of insights. So that's really fascinating that you were able to distill that down and create this business. And I guess related to events now, there's a trend, or at least in the bubble that I'm in, where people are saying B2B marketing teams should be run like media companies. What does that mean? And how does Goldcast fit in?
absolutely, that is actually our sort of long-term vision. We help B2B marketing teams run like media companies, and it's in some ways like an old message, but also new, right? So what in our head, David, it means is that in B2B marketing pre 2018, right? It was very demand gen centric, right? You you try to get people in. So you're building content, but it's for SEO mostly, right? And your goal is to snipe leads, right? And now that's not enough, right? Because SaaS markets are big, so they're so specialized, and just sniping leads is not enough, right? You need to almost market like a B2C firm, right? Where you have your content is also your product, right? So your content is as much your product, the message, your thought leadership is as much of your product as the product itself is your company's product. And this is in some swath of tech companies, right? Especially in the mid-market tech companies, this is something that people had internalized, but in the broader big base B2B ecosystem, it's not, right? So for example, companies like Drift and Outreach and Sendoso, some of the modern ones, they had been doing this, right? Where their content, people were coming to their content even though they didn't want to buy, right? And they were engaging with them just for the content, and the content was as much of a product, right, as their product itself was. So that's what we mean by media company, right? We will help. We want to help marketers build, generate, and distribute content in an engaging way, so that it helps them build their own audience, right? And the other sort of trends that anchor on the last part, building your own audience, also comes from all the issues that people are now having with third-party systems, right? With the cookie-less world, and people being sick of Zoom Info's leads and all of those things, right? People want to build their own audience. So the only way to build audience is to build great content which people can really engage with. And so that's our goal. And if you look at how things are panning out right now and why we have been able to sustain after COVID, was because of our persona, right? So for B2B marketers, digital events is the way to actually run an engaging media company of sorts, right? And so we have seen a good sustenance or even uptick in demand from our customers, where in other segments have actually maybe abandoned digital events, right? Where they were rooted in person, and their main motive was to not actually engage people, but to make money from tickets, for instance, right?
Mm-hmm. So where do you see events going? And I want to frame this with, I mean, there's a lot of layoffs happening in tech right now, right? And I don't know how that affects events, but how do you see the event marketing ecosystem either evolving or changing, or some like maybe the market gets smaller over the next couple of years as these companies, investors are saying, hey, cut expenses, cut non-necessary spend. What are you seeing in the market right now?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. So I'll answer the first part, which is where do we see events going, right? So there are a few sort of fundamental changes that are still happening in events, and they started with COVID, right? But they were long overdue. So one of them is events being a very core, integral part of the whole marketing effort, right? So what that means is that it's not enough now to just throw a big splashy user conference and call it a day, right? And that's what the approach was in the past, and that maybe worked, right? Maybe did not work, no one knew. And now it's not enough, right? So what we are seeing, especially with companies that are at the forefront of all of this, is that their event strategy is very adaptive to what the market, what the company goals need, what the sales team needs, what your pipeline requirements are, and the digital component helps you adapt to that, right? So, for instance, a company which has a mid-funnel problem is going to have a very different event strategy from the one which has a lot of leads, say a PLG company, but has a bottom funnel problem, right? Where they want to convert big enterprise customers and things like that. So the latter would actually do very focused, targeted, say, digital events and smaller field events, versus a company which has a mid-funnel or a top funnel problem could actually do with, say, 4 regional big user conferences, right? So that is how the digital element actually adds a layer of adaptability to event strategies that did not exist before, right? In the absence of digital events as a channel. And so as a result of that, the bigger change is not that events have become omni-channel. It is, right? And it would have happened without COVID, but what it accelerated was events becoming a very core part of the overall integrated marketing strategy, and as adaptable as, say, digital advertising is, or email marketing is. And so our guess is that digital will and continue to be a very important aspect of how event marketing teams go to market, and it helps them give a bigger seat at the revenue table, right, by being adaptable to the company's goals. So this recession is in some ways also a tailwind for us, right? It's obviously a headwind, like it is for everyone, because in many cases the companies could shut down, right, or the entire marketing teams could go. But we are not seeing the kind of, say, reductions in forces in event teams the way we saw in COVID, right, or in 2008, because event marketers have proven, right, that they could still add a lot of value to the company's top line and bottom line with the digital medium, which they have perfected over the last 3 years. And now we are seeing companies who had completely ignored the channel in 3 years also coming to us and talking about digital events. How do you actually drive value from digital events?
I love it. So you mentioned we've been talking about digital events this whole time. What goes into making a great digital event? And like what companies are you seeing do this very well?
Oh, that's a great question, David. So, man, there's so many great examples of companies who do amazing digital events, right? So, the so a component of a great digital event strategy is what I talked about, right? It is hyper aware of what the company needs, right? And a great digital event is essentially a combination of a few things, right? So one is the content, and the content should appeal to what you want, right? So for example, one of our customers is Zuora, right? And Zuora, they're obviously they have no paucity of top funnel, right? Zuora, everyone knows Zuora. So their events are actually very frequent, and they would be like 2 to 4 hour events, and very hyper focused on a particular type of persona, right? So topics such as how to topics about, say, subscription economy that would appeal to, say, a VP persona, right? So maybe they don't have an enormous amount of attendance, but they have the right thing that, say, the VP persona needs in that event. So they'll have a VP level, customer coming in and talking about how they have used Zuora for a particular, use case. or thing. And then they will have thought leaders coming and talking about how, how this world is evolving in general, and how do you thrive in a subscription economy. And then there will be people who would want to come into that event live because they want to talk to that thought leader, right, and ask a question live, and engage with them. So that's one example of how a great event strategy looks like. Then there are companies who are actually killing it with what you would call webinars before, right? So for example, a bunch of our customers who used to do big splash user conferences have now shifted to just doing, bi-monthly single session events, right? With some interactions afterwards. So for example, one of our customers is this company called OnlySell, which sells to pharmacies, right? And so classic B2B. And their insight was that pharmacists love to hear from other pharmacists, right? And their problem is full top funnel, right? They don't have a bottom funnel problem. So their thing is, we'll bring in another pharmacist who would talk about, not about a product, right, but the challenges that pharmacies are facing right now, which is a lot of them. So they always have a customer actually talking about things in their event, and then they have
interesting.
And they have a networking session afterwards. They set up rooms on Goldcast, and people come in and talk for 10-15 minutes about a certain topic, and that's their event actually, and it's working wonders for them. So if you look at this and compare it with the past, this adaptability is not afforded to event marketers in the fully in-person world, right? And that's why people probably defaulted to big splash user conferences, right? Because that's the only way you could potentially create an impact in the only in-person world.
Yeah, I love it too. And it seems like these digital events are more around more personal conversations rather than, at HubSpot, when I first started working there, we were doing like weekly webinars, but it was just like presentations,
yes,
like on WebEx. Now it's actually discussion based. So the format's really evolved, and I think tools like Goldcast allow that sort of discussion to happen.
Yeah.
And so I know we're coming up on time, but one thing I've noticed is Goldcast is currently at about 130, 140 employees. So as a CEO, how do you think about like culture as you scale and building like a high performing team, keeping a bar high as you grow?
Yeah, David, that's a question that I'm grappling with a lot at this point. So we are around 107-8 employees, and there are some advisors, some investors in that 130. But as we were in the early parts, right, I knew everyone in the company, and I still do to a certain extent. And so we never actually thought about how do we set performance benchmarks, because we were sort of leading by example, right? As we have grown, right, and especially in the last 1 year, we have grown a lot in headcount. This problem of how do you ensure a very, very super high quality team and performance is something that's top of mind for me, and I'm still learning. I have just started in that, but my two big sort of learnings in the last 1 year are a couple of things, right? One is that the candor between teams, right, has to scale, and in what I saw is that it only scaled up to the exact team, right? So me and my immediate reportees, we were candid, and probably I was candid with them, they were candid with me, but maybe they were not candid with each other. And especially in remote, it's very hard to break that barrier, right, between people, so that they can be candid to each other and give each other feedback on what they think is not happening right, or where we can improve. So that's one thing that I'm trying to inculcate in the team. Obviously, we are not going all Netflix where we are brutal to each other every day, and that's a great model, but it takes time and effort to get there. So candor is one.
How do you encourage that candor? Because not everyone's comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
Right? Especially remote, where it feels more difficult to build those relationships and get comfortable being candid. But have you found any tactics that help create that comfort?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And there's no one answer, but a few things that have worked for us. One is that, actually, there are a bunch of things. One is that whenever someone comes to me with feedback, right, say a product is coming saying, okay, CS is doing XYZ, which they should not, I would ask the product leader to give that feedback and ask them, are they comfortable giving that feedback to the CS leader, and report back to me how it went, right? The other thing which I always say in all hands in QBRs and every opportunity I have with the larger management team is that we should not fall into fundamental attribution error, right? Anything that's told up, given as feedback doesn't mean that it's about you, right? It's about the situation, and you should not personally take it. And we are all in this together. So just reiterating that, although it sounds very obvious, and I was like, okay, every adult understands it. It's actually not true, because in the heat of the moment when you're getting feedback, your primitive brain doesn't let you remember this topic. So that's another thing. The third thing is I give very candid feedback to people. So starting with me, and I'm pushing my co-founders as well to do it, and the exec team. At least within us, we want to be super candid. But another thing that you brought up is that, and which I am very sort of anchored towards now, is that at least the management team should be in some ways co-located, right? So, for example, now we are in managerial roles, and by management I mean anyone who has people reportees or who is an IC of, say, a principal level. We are trying to hire only either in Bangalore or in East Coast, which so that we can all meet together at least like once a month. And so most of our exec team is in Boston and New York, and so we meet every month or every 6 weeks and spend a day with each other. And that just one day in that 6 weeks is very impactful in breaking those barriers that is hard and remote.
Yeah, or if you can't meet in person, you're at least in the same time zone. I wish we had that forethought. Sometimes we have people in India, in Thailand, in California, and in New York, so it's hard to coordinate meetings sometimes, but we make it work.
Yeah,
awesome.
It is hard.
So we'll wrap it with a couple closing questions here. What's one opinion you have about business that you think people would disagree with?
Yeah. So David, one thing which I believe, and I tell a lot of, especially young people, say coming out of business school, which I have a lot of exposure to, is that I think people overrate operating, especially in the startup world. I think the biggest role of at least the founders and the early team is to understand the market and opportunity better. And operating, I think, is something that can be learned much easily versus the former. So I encourage actually people to go into early stage VC if they want to be an entrepreneur. And I know
interesting. I've never heard that before. I love that. Okay.
Yeah, I know it's very counterintuitive, but I found that to be more critical, right? You can always fix execution in most cases, right? Obviously, it's very important, but you cannot fix your market choices and your timing. And that's something that good, especially if you have worked with a good VC, you have a very acute understanding of.
So you're saying have the zoomed out view and be able to look at a market and see the trends and opportunities before you just jump straight to trying to operate.
Yeah, exactly.
Good thing on that. I like that. I've never heard that. Okay. So what's one impactful piece of advice that you've been given?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question, David. So let me think about it. So I think one thing that I have actually, which I'll come back to that point again, is this advice of co-locating management teams was actually not my idea. It was given to us by someone who we were going to hire as a CR, were planning to hire as a CRO. So I don't know if you know Karen Rubin. She was at HubSpot, one of the early companies in HubSpot. So
is this allowed to be public?
Yeah.
Has it been announced?
No. So we were not. We didn't hire her as a CRO.
Oh, but okay.
We were talking to her to make her part of the management team, and at that point, her reservation was that our team was very spread because it was a few people and it wasn't clear, right, whether we were committed to building an in-person team. And we had very long discussions with her at that point of time about why is it important. And after, that thought stuck in my head. And after a while, I realized that, that is true. So all of our eventual hires, head of product, head of design, everyone, I had choices to hire people in, West Coast as well, but we went with people in in Boston.
Okay, got it. I thought you were going to announce she was going to join your team because we actually work with her current company that
Oh,
she referred us into. So I was like, oh,
okay.
awkward.
No,
But no,
no,
it sounds like that
no.
was an old conversation that you had.
That was a
Okay.
very old, like probably 1.5, 2 years old
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. So, well, last question here is, I know you're a big reader. What's one book you'd recommend more people read?
Oh, great question. I think anyone who wants to understand the world more and not be frustrated by it, right, is should read this book called The Moral Animal. So it was published in '97 by this incredible British intellectual called Robert Wright, right? And The Moral Animal is essentially an evolutionary psychology book, right? So it talks about why we behave in certain ways, right? Why altruism exists, or why men are so much more aggressive, those kind of things, right? So and they give a very great sort of analysis of why all of these things are true, right? And why
Yeah.
why it's important for us to understand. So that book had a profound impact on me and helping me understand how why people behave a certain way.
The Model Animal, you said? Who's
the,
that by?
the Moral Animal, sorry, it's a
Oh, the
MO.
Moral.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I hadn't heard that one. Okay. Thank you for that. It's rare that I get a book recommended that I haven't heard of. Usually it's like a popular one, but this is amazing. I'm going to write it down here. Last question before we wrap up. Where can people find you on the internet? What's the best place to find you?
Yeah, David, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So that's the best place to find me. I'm checking all my DMs generally, so people can message me there and I'll respond.
Amazing. We'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. Palash, it was great having you on the show, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for making the time with us.
Thanks, David. Thanks for asking great questions.